Good morning, everyone. A good Chodesh. We are continuing here in the words of the CHOFETZ about the detrimental effects of Lashon Hara, and he's speaking about how the Yetzer Hara works very hard on a person to try to get them to speak Lashon Hara and convince them that you're not saying Lashon Hara over here. It could even be it's a mitzvah for you to speak badly about a person. Then he writes like this: V'imraya ha-Yetzer Hara shebe'ilu inyonim la yinatzach la'adam. If the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, sees that he's simply not succeeding with a person, he cannot convince them. This person is very strong in their convictions, and they hold themselves solid when it comes to speaking Lashon Hara. They don't fall for the trickery of the Yetzer Hara. They understand that it's not a mitzvah to speak Lashon Hara. They understand that it's inappropriate. They understand the Torah says not to speak. So what does the Yetzer Hara do in that time? He has to go back to the drawing board. And he has to come with some guerrilla warfare. He will trick him the exact opposite way. And that is, he convinces this person that you have to be very, very strict when it comes to the laws of Lashon Hara. Until he convinces the person that every single word that comes out of his mouth, every statement, almost everything that he says is really falling into the category of speaking Lashon Hara. And if that's the case, it's impossible to live as a human being amongst other people. Unless this person will remove himself completely from the ways of the world. Because the Yetzer Hara has convinced him that almost every single word that comes out of your mouth is bordering on Lashon Hara. You can't talk about this, you can't talk about that, you can't say this, you can't say that. If you say these words, that's Lashon Hara. If you do like this, if you look like that, it's all Lashon Hara. So the person now becomes a paranoid, ultra-Orthodox religious Jew who is afraid to open his mouth and say anything. And he can't be around human beings anymore, because when you're around human beings, naturally you're going to slip and you're going to fail, and you're going to end up having a conversation where there's going to be Lashon Hara that is there. So this person now has to be mafish, he has to separate himself. He'll become a hermit. He'll stay away from everyone and everything and every situation, because he's always afraid that he's going to speak Lashon Hara. Now this obviously is not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. It is known that the CHOFETZ was a rather talkative individual, because the CHOFETZ understood the laws of Lashon Hara so well that he was able to have conversations with people, sometimes for a long amount of time, just to be able to prove to a person, or to prove to the people that were listening, that if you are well versed in the laws of Lashon Hara, if you know what is permissible and what is a sin to say, there's no problem having a conversation. There's plenty that a Yid could talk about. There's plenty of conversational material that 2 people or 3 people or 4 people could sit down and talk about for a long time on end, and never once border or venture onto or trample upon the laws of Lashon Hara. So the Yetzer Hara convinces a person, unfortunately, that everything you're saying is Lashon Hara, or is likely to venture into Lashon Hara, and therefore a person decides, I can't say anything. This is like the Nachash, the serpent, who came to Chava in his opening remarks, and he said, maybe Hashem said you can't eat from anything in the garden. Maybe you can't eat any of the trees. Who says only one tree? Maybe you're not allowed to eat any of the trees. That's the words of the Yetzer Hara over here. Who says you can say that? Who says you can talk like this? Maybe you can have any conversation at all. Everything that you say is going to be, and unfortunately, says the Nachash, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of you? You can't say a single word. Besides this, many people are lacking the knowledge of knowing that there's a prohibition of accepting words of Lashon Hara, listening and accepting them as being true. The prohibition is not, you're not even allowed to believe it in your heart. You're allowed to be suspicious of the words of Lashon Hara that you hear, but you're not allowed to believe it and accept them as being true. There are many different details when it comes to accepting and receiving the words of Lashon Hara. urechilas, and tail-bearing. I can't explain all of them now, says the CHOFETZ Chaim, but that's why we have a long sefer called Sefer CHOFETZ Chaim to go through everything. We have Einam Yoidim Eich Lesakenes Hadavar Im Avar Alisa Sibur Lashon Hara Chilas Kavalasim, and so too, a person has no idea how to fix up the sin if they stumble into speaking Lashon Hara, or hearing Lashon Hara, or God forbid spreading Lashon Hara. They have no idea what they can do to rectify the situation. So a person ends up being stuck on many different fronts, says the CHOFETZ Chaim, between the Yetzer Hara and their own lack of knowledge of what the halachas are. A person can be walking around a time bomb of Lashon Hara waiting to erupt and explode on so many different fronts and counts, and therefore we find ourselves in a very big predicament, says the CHOFETZ Chaim, where a generation, he's going back, we're talking about over 100 years ago, where a generation that is failing in protecting themselves from speaking Lashon Hara, and we have to figure out how we're going to tighten the reins over here to make sure that we don't speak Lashon Hara about another Jew. Have a wonderful day.